walk on water cause I'm drowning and you made it. Met you on the corner, first in love, it was payday. Candy colored nails, match the candy coated bands. I needed your contact, my eyes bugging out my head. Cause you hot as shit, nah, I just the African. Not no bottom, top notch out of here. Love me like I love myself, love it when she smile at me. White teeth with a heart of gold, now I'ma put a diamond in it. Ring, 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 love calling me. Ring like the camera is free, when she calling me. Ring, 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 love calling me. Ain't gon' be a man to pick you up, you stay down for me. Eyes closed, arms out, flying. Red Bull, baby, give me wings, pilot. Girl, I love your voice, sound like love calling it. Love called again, and I ain't miss a call yet. And I ain't miss a call yet. Love called again, and I ain't miss a call yet. And I ain't miss a call yet. Love called again, and I ain't miss a call yet.
Empty hearts and neon lights, they're playing with my mind. Gotta get out of here tonight. Oh, I wanna run off and fly. And I'll tell myself it's fine to be alone, just to find somewhere that finally feels like home. Oh, oh, oh. I hate all this overthinking. Oh, 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 oh. The more I swim, the more I'm sinking. Take me to a world of silver. No more heartbreaks, tears, painkillers. Take me somewhere unfamiliar. Bring me back to where we started out. Get me out of now. To where we started out. Get me out of now. To where we started. We've come this far, through wind and rain. So take your chances.
Hicks Token says the treaty bill is great, but I wish they renamed it Treaty Articles Bill. Look, I mean, I don't. Well, I mean, to be fair, it's called the Treaty Principles Bill, and I suppose the principles that they're trying to use reflect what the articles are saying, or at least are based according to what the ACT Party believes that they say, and I think they've generally done a pretty good job with that in that respect. So, yeah, I mean, I definitely see what you mean, but I think it's the Treaty Principles Bill works fine for me. I don't think the Treaty Articles Bill would do all too much different. In practice, it won't really be a different. Anyways, if you got any comments on how the chat is looking, do let me know. I'm trying to find the right balance to be able to help with my visibility, because sometimes I lean forward, I can't read the name. Right here, I can get the names really well, and also I can see the text very well now as well. But I think we may as well just get into it. Seems as though you're active. No dramas there. Quickly turn the music off. Quickly look again. There are no principles in the treaty, just articles, so it's a clear line. Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you. I'm of the same belief that there are no principles in the treaty, and nonetheless, our academia has convinced the country that there is. It convinced most of the politicians that there is, and we have to work within those confines if we want to get anywhere. And for me, it's a matter of compromise. I'd be more than happy for New Zealand First to be like, hey, look, ACT will support your bill. However, we do want to amend the bill so that come coalition, or come referendum time, I should say, we are able to choose. We're able to choose whether we want to support the principles that are proposed by you, reject the principles proposed by you, or remove reference to principles in law altogether. I think that would be the best way of doing it. And what I would do, because some people will be concerned this will help those opposed win, you do a system where you have a ranking. You choose your favorite and then your second favorite option. So let's say we have 3 lots of votes, right? And for some reason it's 40% in favour of the principles bill. There is let's say another 41%, let's say 41% in favour of rejecting the proposed bill. And then let's say, the remainder 19% or whatever it is, are in favour of removing reference to them altogether. What we could do is ensure that you get to pick 2 so that the vote or the option with the least votes after that first round are then rejected, and then the second option is picked, and then that may of course lean it more in favour to those supporting the proposed principles. I think that would be probably the best compromise you could come up with there. But of course, I think if the option for New Zealand First is either this bill or the status quo, where academia doesn't care that there's no principles, they'll act as if there are. National don't care if there's no principles, they'll act as if there are. Labour doesn't care. Te Pāti Māori doesn't care. The Greens don't care. If there are no principles, they'll act as if there are. That is the reality in which we are operating. And so if the difference is between supporting these bills or these proposed principles, which do more or less reflect exactly what the treaty says, and not, and having the status quo where we have people campaigning for racial separatism on this basis, then then it's a no-brainer to support it, because in effect the outcome will be identical as what New Zealand First wants, except we will have principles there that are ideally going to be entrenched, right? And so as long as the outcome of this would be entrenched, I think that's positive, because that makes it extremely difficult to overturn compared to your average law, because it would require a supermajority to overturn. Nonetheless, let's actually get into the article. Thank you very much for your contributions so far, Hex and Tennille Baker. Although you just said, is that PL? Whatever. Forgive me if I'm supposed to know what that means, but thanks for contributing anyway. But yes, the Maui-sized fishhook and axe treaty principles bill. Now, this is done by Ben Thomas. Now, I thought Ben Thomas was quite cheeky over on X. He, over on X just a little bit earlier, he said something along the lines of, I should be able to find it because I do believe I retweeted it. He said, broke, which is the Treaty Principles Bill establishes we are one people. Woke, the Treaty Principles Bill is ahistorical and divisive. And bespoke, the Treaty Principles Bill is as signed off by Cabinet, is a radically progressive incorporation of the treaty into law. Now, whilst I think what he's labelled broke is, he probably goes into it in the article, it's a little bit rubbish to call it broke because it's just a fact. But I do think it's an interesting way of looking at it for someone who's kind of a smidge more on the National Party ideological wagon on this issue. So, Ben Thomas is a regular opinion contributor. He is public relations consultant and political commentator who has worked for the National Party. Opinion. Has David Seymour had a road to Ngaruawahia conversation? In January, the late Kingi Tuheitia rebuked the ACT leader's controversial proposed bill to hold a referendum on rewriting the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi developed by the courts, government and the Waitangi Tribunal. Now, I think it's important that we note these principles were developed by the courts, the government and Waitangi Tribunal, not by the document signed in 1840. And given it wasn't developed or based on what was signed in 1840, that's a problem. Unless they're outlined specifically in that document, we should not be having the conversation as if they are somehow the same thing as the document, or that they should possess the same amount of standing as that document. That's just how it is. Whilst we technically don't have the Treaty of Waitangi entrenched in our law at all, we still recognise it as having this overarching authority and power to control the direction of our policy, because it is such an important part or important moment in our history that really has allowed the legitimacy of this government to exist and to thrive. There's no principles, the treaty is written, Tūheitia said. That's it. There's no principles, the treaty is written. That's actually a very interesting quote, is it not? There's no principles, the treaty is written, that's it. So even though the late Kingi Tūheitia acknowledged there's no principles, the treaty is written, which in this case means that he and his minions think they get to dictate. They get to dictate what the treaty says, irrespective of what the treaty says. Because the basis in which the Te Pāti Māori and all of them, the pro-separatists, the Kingitanga, make their arguments for what they deserve, what is a breach of their rights and so forth, is based, it's rooted in these false principles, or in their false interpretations, or their claims of what the treaty says that can't be found anywhere within it. So this is a very interesting claim to have included in here. Seymour was one of the thousands of mourners and dignitaries who paid respect to Tūheitia at his funeral tangi at Tūranga Waiwai Marae last week. Back in Wellington, he had Cabinet sign off drafting instructions for the bill, with some striking changes to the planned replacement principles. Rather than making the bill more moderate in the face of vociferous criticism, it is instead potentially more radical than those critics and even Tūheitia himself could have hoped for in their wildest dreams. Hex also said, and I think he might have said this earlier, yeah, remove principles from laws would be great, 100%. In particular, it appears that it may effectively incorporate the treaty itself into law, a legal first that even the most activist judges have balked at. You know what's crazy to me? That we have the Treaty of Waitangi Act 1975, and yet we haven't effectively incorporated the treaty itself into the law yet. We had the perfect opportunity with the bill, or the act literally called the Treaty of Waitangi Act, yet this would be when it happens. It's actually crazy. And there is no reason not to. Because as it's actually written, as the document's actually written, no one should actually be opposed to what it outlines at all. We should all be very, very happy that it outlines that the government has the authority, has the sovereignty, that we all have the same rights and duties under law. Those are the two fundamentals, the two key elements of it. Article 2 is a little bit different, where it goes into rights and so forth. But that is because it's it's an article for the times. It's not the 1800s anymore. And so that one makes it a bit more complicated. Mr. Sevenfold says, I suppose the idea of this bill, what exactly do you mean, I suppose the idea of this bill? Michelle says, because whānau means for Māori family, but family to Māori means an unimportant Pākehā thing. Yeah, I mean, I think I understand what you're trying to say there. Yeah, I mean, I do find that the those in Māoridom who are critical of Pākehā and European culture like to make out as if we don't have culture, that we don't care about our whānau, we don't care about our wider family, like they have iwi and hapu, that we don't care about things, that we don't have anything special about us, our culture, anything like that. I mean, the carpet alone in Parliament is evidence of culture. And if you don't know about the carpet, well then, that says it all. Chris Frederick says, 3 articles in the Treaty of Waitangi, how many principles are there? Well, that's a good question. As proposed by the ACT Party, there would be 3 principles, each recommending or representing one of the 3 articles. According to the Waitangi Tribunal, there are several. There are 3 key ones, which are participation, partnership, and protection. Now, protection is really the only one that can be argued there, because if you just go and look at Article 2, it talks about the protection of the rights of the protecting taonga and so forth. That's about the only thing of the 3 Ps which they like to talk about, which are like the the underpinning key principles that has any real relevance. The other two, partnership, nowhere does it outline a partnership. Anyone pretending it says partnership is ridiculous. And the participation, as if we're supposed to guarantee participation. This is the important one. This is what they use to justify having Māori wards, Māori seats in Parliament, mandated seats in every level of governance, be that the central or local, etc. Even they would even go as far as to things outside of literal government, such as water bodies and school boards, and you get the point. And so that's the fundamental issue there. Mr. Mello says, we can't forget what was wrong with Three Waters and Māori wards. Treaty principles are at the heart of all of it. Exactly, and that's what I was just alluding to. Without particularly the participation principle, the completely made up nonsense by a judge in 1987, Three Waters and Māori wards would have absolutely no basis at all. At least the basis to retaining them or establishing specifically Three Waters, they'd have no basis, because that is the principle they use as the justification. You supported it. Great, Mr. Sevenfold. Equity should all be equal. Now, equality and equity, of course, are two different things, and so I would very much, supporting equality, great. Equity, on the other hand, is an impossible pipe dream. It's a word that I don't even think has much value in the world. It's absolutely stupid to bring it up. Not calling you stupid, of course, but I think people that like to approach things by trying to achieve equity, they fundamentally don't understand how life works. Life isn't equitable. I could have as close to as perfect an upbringing as possible and have that exact same experience shared with siblings, and we could all have very different outcomes in life. That proves equity is impossible. You could give people the exact same opportunities. You give the people the exact same amount of money. You give people as close to the exact same life as possible. And no matter what, it will never end out the same. Ever. That is why the belief in equity is nonsensical. The text Cabinet has agreed on states that one of the principles corresponding to Article 2 of the treaty would read that the Crown recognises the rights that Papua and Iwi had when they signed the treaty. The Crown will respect and protect those rights. That is a very good change. Now, when this bill first came out, I did criticise one thing only one thing, and that was Article 2, what it was stating. And it was stating that that all the rights of property rights and so forth of all New Zealanders would be protected, right? Or all lands and treasures and rah of all New Zealanders would be protected. That was fundamentally flawed, because that's not actually what it said. This, on the other hand, is very much consistent with what was said. The only issue with it is that leaves a lot of room for interpretation. There is a lot of room for interpretation here. And that is going to be what leaves it open for judges' discretion, Waitangi Tribunal discretion, arguments to be had. But what I do think is important is that any of those decisions by judges, by the Waitangi Tribunal, need to be done with everything else in mind. That Article 3, or the third principle in particular, is outlining that everyone has the same rights and duties under law. People should be treated as equals. We are all equals. And so if any of the decisions made from the process of, interpreting this specific principle, then if it's not consistent with equality, with the same rights and duties, then perhaps we should be questioning those judges, the Waitangi Tribunal, and their decision making. And I'm not afraid to say that. So that's going to be the issue with this. It's one that more people can support, and I don't think there's really an argument not to support it. Outside of it leaves room for interpretation, which may cause squabbling. But given it's easily the most difficult article to translate into the present day, I think this is about the best you could expect. It goes on to say that those rights and interests differ from the rights of other New Zealanders only when recognised in legislation like, for example, a treaty principles law. This is potentially a far more progressive position than the current treaty principles allow for. The current treaty principles are less an interpretation of the treaty or te tiriti, the Māori text, and more of a creative exercise in compromise, heavily weighted in favour of the results of the imperfect evolution of modern New Zealand society and the inescapable political reality of the Crown's sovereignty. I think that's very well put. Read that again. But whilst you do, I'll read out Mr. Sevenfold saying, a person's race should not play into their value. It reminds me of the Nazis, not the same time period I know, but human beings are human beings. Absolutely. Absolutely nothing to do with governance, representation should be dictated or mandated based on one's ethnicity. That is just disgusting. A disgusting way to view things, and the fact that is being so normalised in our country is deeply concerning. So again, the current treaty principles are less an interpretation of the treaty and more of a creative exercise in compromise, heavily weighted in favour of the results of an imperfect evolution of modern New Zealand society and the inescapable political reality of the Crown's sovereignty. And I think that's the important part. The imperfect evolution of modern New Zealand society. You can't look at what it stated or what it states, the document states, and say, look, we need to, in the modern day, 2024, apply this exactly the same, in the exact same way they would have applied it in 1840, because it's impossible. It is impossible to do that. And this is the compromising question here, and I think that's why how they've restructured the second principle, that is reflecting Article 2, is probably the best you're going to get. Principles such as a situationally dependent notion of partnership and a duty of active protection of Māori interests recognise the political reality, while acknowledging that rangatiratanga of iwi and hapu should at least be considered when decisions are made affecting those interests set out in the treaty. I want to read that again. Principles such as a situationally dependent notion of partnership. There should be no situationally dependent notion of partnership at all, because there is no partnership. There is no situationally dependent notion of partnership. And a duty of active protection. And I mean, yes, there is a duty of active protection, but how do we interpret that active protection, right? And that goes back to, that leaves a lot of room for interpretation up in that redefining of their second principle. Of Māori interests, recognise the political reality while acknowledging the rangatiratanga of iwi and hapu should at least be considered. Now, as long as this means that it reflects absolutely no mandated seats in Parliament or Māori, or in council chambers, etc., based on your ethnicity, be you Māori or otherwise, then that's a good step forward. That's a great step forward. But additionally, we need to ensure that it doesn't allow the same rhetoric of we are better than you to persist from the likes of Te Pāti Māori, or we are entitled to this. We are rangatiratanga and therefore, or we are the rangatira, we're a tangata whenua, we are entitled to this. We cannot allow that to be maintained. Whatever it is understood to mean, be that the first, second, or third principle, it is not allowed to reinforce that mentality, because it's that mentality which fuels the separatist movement. And that is what we need to stop. They are basically principles to guide the Crown's thinking in how it should make space to allow for the exercise of traditional self-determination and authority, including input into decision-making in a way that doesn't significantly disrupt the massive redistribution of Māori prosperity into both private and public hands since 1840. I'll read that again. They are basically principles to guide the Crown's thinking and how it should make space to allow for the exercise of traditional self-determination and authority, including input into decision-making, in a way that doesn't significantly disrupt the massive redistribution of Māori property into both the private and public hands since 1840. Now, I'm aware this is an opinion piece by Ben Thomas, but how he's wording things does concern me a little bit. Because if this is indeed the intention of the ACT Party, to make this change, but it not really stand in the way of this old way of thinking of we are tangata whenua, we get to do what we want, we should have mandated decision making, well then what's the bloody point? What is genuinely the point? All you'd be doing is introducing principles and legitimizing even further these same ways of thinking which are contributing to the growing separatist movement in our country. We cannot allow that to happen. And so if this is a reflection or an accurate representation of where we're heading with this, that leaves me concerned. Even though, yes, indeed, this would be inconsistent, the actual manifestation or the application of Māori decision-making, simply because they are Māori, would be inconsistent with what the intention is from what we've read to date, from what David Seymour has said. If any of this is remotely accurate, that leaves wiggle room at the very least. And that does concern me, unless I've misunderstood it. Obviously, these principles grant fewer rights in the treaty itself, which guarantees at least undisturbed possession of their properties, including their lands, forests, and fisheries, for as long as they wish to retain them, and at a maximum something like self-government. Now, this is a very contentious part, and it is one of many interpretations of Article 2 of the treaty, and I find it's not helpful to dwell on it, or at least dwell on it from the 1800s perspective. You need to look at it from the practicalities of the 2024, otherwise you're just going to tie yourself in knots. Watching Kick says, as usual, ACT just pandering to their voter base, but not really doing much. I mean, they very well could be achieving quite a lot here, but I'm not entirely sure. And I am noticing that the TikTok chat is not actually showing up on the main chat here, which is a little bit annoying. However, I do know how to fix that for the future. I can actually bring it over and have 2 chats there, which is a little bit annoying, but I do have room to do it. So I'll be able to do that. But to quickly look at a couple of those, we got Dodgy saying, hi, how are you doing tonight, Chur? Doing very well, mate, thank you very much. Harlem says, can't wait till they think they can change it, because take that away and you take the power away from Pākehā. I don't know if he fully understands what quite going on here. Savage, just a lot of claps. Thanks. Ken Brown, it's not impossible, it just means today's society loses out because of past atrocities. Again, I need a little bit more elaboration there. Savage Sniper says, New Zealanders like you are pivotal to Te Kotahitanga or Aotearoa New Zealand. Cool. Maxing Lydia says, nah bro, you're pushing your twist on it. I would love to hear you elaborate a smidge further, but so far we're not getting shadow banned over on TikTok, so that's an improvement on the last stream at the very least. Now, what I'm going to quickly do is I'm going to add that chat in, but I'm going to highlight the following for you to quickly take a look at. Just a moment. So hopefully I'll be able to read it, as long as it's if it's large enough. But you can see we've got two chats going on. For the next one, I'll try and get them incorporated. But for now, we'll have both up there. Now, very quickly, Taxa said, "Don't believe everything you read." I completely agree. Don't believe everything you read. It's not wise at all. And I'm saying now I won't be able to read it, so I'll just increase the size. In fact, what I will do is very quickly. Bear with me, people. It will not be long at all. Okay. Well, anyway, Neil Baker says, "Please remember that this document was created by our ancient tipuna. 1830s kōrero was old school, older than the reo spoken by our people from 1900s to today. Understanding te whakahu of each article." Well, I mean, it wasn't really created by ancient tipuna. It was created by white blokes. So let's not forget that. It was created by a couple of white blokes. Or a few. But yes, I mean, of course, it would have been based on the conversations with tipuna, and so forth. So yeah, I mean, that's whatever. But yeah, sweet. We're good to go. Thank you very much. So it's going to look a bit funny today with the two chats, but I'm going to have to try and fix that for the future. That's a bit annoying, but we will continue now. The original intent of Act's policy was to replace these principles with broad statements about the rule of law, the recognition of property rights and equal rights for all citizens. I mean, that's still, generally speaking, the basis of it, but Article 2 is just a little bit more simplified. And so, yeah, that's just how it is. It's a little bit more, well, not simplified, but a little bit more open to interpretation, and it's a smidge more true to the intention, while still accounting for the realities of being in the 21st century. Neil Baker says, "It was designed to accommodate everyone, no one was left out." And on that, I 100% agree. It was designed to accommodate everyone. The effect of enacting these inoffensive enough provisions by pasting them over the top of the existing treaty principles, however, would be to restate the articles of the treaty but without reference to Māori. And yeah, that was the fundamental issue. What they said in the last one technically wasn't wrong, but they didn't explicitly reference Māori, which Māori was the key underpinning group of people being spoken to, and being afforded protections in Article 2. So that was very, very important that they rectified that with this change. Treaty principles law without the treaty was presumably a bridge too far to defend historically and intellectually. In contrast, the new principles appear more like treaty in law without the principles. Yeah, I mean, what they're doing is essentially just outlining the treaty's articles very concisely. That's all. And so it is effectively just taking the treaty and putting it into our law very, very plainly for all to see. And so, yeah, I mean, I think I'm no two ways about it. That is what they're doing here. And that, for that reason, I think the compromise that New Zealand needs to make, New Zealand First needs to make, is that they just support this because it's effectively going to do what they want whilst not doing what they want. It's going to have the same effective outcome. So, yeah. Under Cabinet's decisions, the law will not alter or amend the treaty itself, and it would require the Crown to respect and protect the rights outlined in the treaty as they were in 1840, not just a few paltry rights to consultation and decision input. 100%. This would be a requirement in the interpretation of any legislation where the treaty principles were relevant, according to the courts and officials' advice on New Zealand's first own treaty clause review policy. This is all of them, not just those with dedicated clauses. Chris Frederick says Busby and Hobson wrote the draft treaty. Yeah, exactly. Busby and Hobson wrote it. And then from there, it was really, they just brought out firstly, actually, from the draft treaty, the Māori text was written, and after the Māori text was received reasonably well and they began signing it in Waitangi, they immediately began writing up the official English text that we all know about. Reading the accompanying cabinet paper, it's clear enough that this radical position is not what ACT is trying to achieve. Let's go back. This would be a requirement in the interpretation of any legislation where the treaty principles were relevant, according to the courts and officials' advice on New Zealand's first own treaty clause review policy. This is all of them, not just those with dedicated clauses. In reading the accompanying cabinet paper, it's clear enough that this radical position is not what ACT is trying to achieve, which is to narrow the rights of iwi and hapu, not expand them. It's not clear how the proposal ended up as it has, perhaps another miracle on the road to Huntly transformation. Huntly's never been transformed. Officials are either playing along or have simply analysed Seymour's intention rather than the proposed words that present a Maui-sized fishhook to catch onto judicial interpretation not seen since Section 9 of the State-Owned Enterprises Act hauled up the beginnings of modern treaty settlement processes. Tanel says, yes, the Pākehā wrote both and lied in the Pākehā version. Now that is something I will not agree with because it is in fact a lie. There was no lying in the Pākehā version, just an extremely exhausting overcomplication of saying the exact same thing. And that is something that I've been over at length and will be happy to do so at length again in the future. Maybe it doesn't matter in the end. Seymour has managed to secure a full 6-month select committee process to attract maximum din and rancour from motivated and moneyed activist groups who will likely not concern themselves with the textual details. That will help ACT appeal to a base of voters not impressed by its much more worthy and substantive achievements such as the Ministry of Regulation and Record Farm Act funding. But National New Zealand First remain clear that they will not support it through the second reading in any form. Conversation or no, the bill is still dead as soon as it hits the air. Now, what does everyone think about the lack of support from National New Zealand First, especially given what has been changed about the bill, which is that the reference to Article 2 is changed from the protection of all New Zealanders and their rights and of their right to own land and whatever, or what it is now, which is the protection of what is outlined in Article 2 for Māori, which is probably the best compromise you could possibly come up with and alleviates much of the criticism that it had been getting to date. David Reynolds says, where in Britain's history of treaties did we ever hand over so much to so few, especially in such a strong position? Yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, people like to say, oh yes, but the British were a minority in New Zealand at the time. It's like, sure, but they were a very, very advanced civilization by the standards of that time, at least certainly by the standards of New Zealand, and what Māori had developed to that point. And, Māori had already been to Britain at this point, let's not forget. They had seen for themselves what civilization could look like, and those very same people would have informed their iwi and hapu members what it's like over there. So they weren't entirely ignorant of what things look like, what to expect, and they still signed up to this anyway. They chose to at the end of the day. We can't pretend that they didn't. Tanel says it was because of the antithesis process. I've no idea what you're trying to say there, sorry. No idea. And it looks like TikTok for now is okay. It is updating. It's just being slow. Korha says, or Bert says, don't believe everything you read. Bert says, Act Bill is dead in water, so waste of time either way. Just hand over NZ to Māori as guardians. I think that's a rather disturbing way of looking at it. A rather disturbing way of looking at it indeed. And hello, Simon. Good evening to Simon Anderson. Make sure to tune into Simon TV when he next goes live, everyone. Very good. He had talk back last night. I jumped on for a little bit, had a chat about the Victoria University stigma study scandal, which you'll be able to find on YouTube and X, that I've done another stream on today already before this one. Tanel again says, because they were under the puppet strings of the aliens and the elites that are getting exposed as we speak. Okay, Tanel, I think I'm just going to tune out there, to be honest. Yeah, feel free to send me through some broader information somewhere on that, though. And Korha too says, cured everyone, don't even answer him or give him time. Ka kite. Oh, thank you, Korha. You're always extremely, extremely constructive and provide everyone with great insights into what they're wasting their time on. Chris Frederick says, the English beat the French. Exactly. At the end of the day, I look at this. You know how New Caledonia is in a bit of a shambles right now? That could have been this place, New Caledonia. It's not. Instead, we are very much different to what New Caledonia has ended up like, and we should be extremely grateful of that. There can be no denying we've got the best mix of, Crown Dominion and independent state. We've got like a really good kind of balance there. Whilst we recognise the British Crown as our sovereign and head of state, it doesn't really feel like that, right? We still feel like our own place. We don't get to vote in the UK elections, and all of that. So we really do feel like this is our own part of the world to shape in the way we want, with no real influence from the UK at all. So isn't that great? But there doesn't seem to be much of an update on either of the chats. Oh, David Reynolds says, Tanel, you're injecting outlandish opinions, no doubt gained from your biased education. Give facts based on proof. I mean, I agree with some of that. It's definitely injecting a little bit of a complex element to the discussion, which I don't really have information on. So, for example, the aliens is kind of where you lost me. The elites I can understand, but the aliens not so much. So yes. But I did say this would be a bit of a shorter stream before I started it. Only about an hour, so I'll probably go a few more minutes yet if there's anyone either on TikTok or the other two chats happy to keep us going. I was going to go into the other subject here, Verity Johnson, this bootcamp thing's a PR debacle, but I might leave that for something else. I have already made comments on it to some extent on X, if you want to go see where I stand on that already. But for at least the moment, I think that'll about do it, with the exception of keeping an eye on the chat. So I'm going to keep this screen up and play some music, let it run for a few minutes, and then we'll end it off there.
To you, say it like that. If I hate you, then find someone new. Baby, but you know I never will. No, so I choke you down just like a pill.
And old David says Māori loved the British and would beg for ships to land, often chasing them for miles up and down the coast. Read more original documents. Hey, look, I'd love to read some of those documents. That sounds fascinating. I won't comment any further than that. Tanel says our tipuna gave us tikanga. Okay, you don't believe me. I appreciate and respect your kōrero. That's absolutely fine. I respect you for contributing. It's always helpful to have something to to respond to. And thanks for tuning in, Chris. It's my pleasure. As for TikTok, doesn't look like I'm getting anything from them, although people are joining in here and there, not necessarily sticking around. That's completely fine. So we will turn the tunes back on for a moment. Well, I mean, even if she isn't the most Māori, it doesn't really matter. I'm Māori, I don't look it. I'm barely it, most would argue, if you want to talk about the specifics. But it doesn't matter. If you're Māori, you're Māori. There's no need to bring up percentages in any way, in my opinion. But hey, that's just me. As for track, I've currently got a playlist from No Copyright Sounds up there, just the easiest for me. I don't get any drums from them, and it's just a 13 years mix. It's whatever. I don't know what the name of this one specifically is. Cheers, David. Thanks for tuning in. You said you'll send links. Got to go wipe on TV back. Fair enough. Me on the TV. How crazy. Thanks for tuning in, mate. And thank you for the follow over on TikTok, Cal Mays. Sorry if I got that wrong. Oh, it doesn't bother me, mate. If I'm on it, if I'm not, it doesn't bother me. Tanel says, remember me when the truth of corrupted government in connection to Anunnakis Nazi deep state. Okay. And that's not, forgive me if I laughed, but I don't doubt the deep state. I of course appreciate the threat of globalists and so forth, but there are some things that are a little bit, overdone for my liking, and I'll just be blunt with that. Cheers, Chris. I'm not sure if it will remove tax breaks for Māori businesses or anything beyond what they are. I wouldn't really. I'm not particularly sure on that, Warren. Time will tell, I suppose. Time will certainly tell. If nothing else, thank you, Tanel, for tuning in and contributing. Warren says this is the equal rights and obligation, but yeah, well, I would 100% presume that that would be the step forwards. Obviously, I haven't seen anything set in stone with respect to that specifically being amended. Obviously, that will be something much further down the line. You would have to say after the next election, that sort of distance away, because I predict if we do get to the stage where we do get a referendum, because that's what's it's going to take here, a referendum. That referendum won't take place till the 2026 election, so it's a long time down the road here. And when we get close, perhaps we'll get a better insight. And I'm still not entirely convinced we're going to get to the point where we do get the opportunity for a referendum. But I have been asked by someone today to look at doing a petition to apply some pressure on the government to give the people the opportunity. Give the people the opportunity to vote whether they support this or not. Because unless we do that, we may not get that opportunity, and that would be, quite frankly, a right shame. And so yes, I think it's extremely important that we do so. And so I'll be looking at doing that, setting that up, and we've got quite a bit of time to build up this pressure. We probably won't be hearing back from the select committee till the end of the first quarter next year, so potentially even later. So we're talking March, April, May, before we get to a second reading. So that bodes well, and that depends on when, of course, the first reading takes place. It should be about 6 months from the first reading taking place. Keep an eye on that. Chris Frederick said 17.5% for all, and so yeah, hopefully that's the case. Warren also says certainly within the tourism industry, there's a large group with concerns how this would be interpreted. Yep, absolutely fair. Tanel says just remember that everything that has to do with money, it comes from a higher place. So looked at the elites, the corrupt government, it's going to rewrite the new world order. That's every human. And I think that's what's going to happen, is all corrupted. I mean, I don't for a second disagree about the world being corrupt, people in high places abusing their station to obtain power and control. Warren says, if we don't have the talk, we can never end this. I agree, long path, but as I mentioned above, powerful interests would be held by small groups. Yep, 100%. I said I'd go for an hour, so in the next 5 minutes I will wrap it all up. But thank you absolutely everyone who has tuned in. It's been an absolute pleasure to read that article, hear your insights on it, and all of that good stuff. Very much appreciate the engagement. It helps continue things on a little bit, provides more insights and so forth. And I'll definitely work on getting that TikTok chat integrated to this one next time around. I'm not actually sure why it hasn't, because it's the same multi-streaming service software. So I'll have a look at it. See if we can get that fixed for the next time. But at least in positive news, this time in this stream, the TikTok side of things did not get shadow banned for some ridiculous reason like it did in the last one. I think it potentially was the subject matter, and they just give up some bullshit reason as to why we cannot look at it. Warren says, cheers for the content and backbone. No worries, Warren, my pleasure. As the Enterprise, hello, Robert Zimmerman here. Thanks for your video, man. Absolutely no worries. Thank you for tuning in. We'll be doing them, of course, more regularly over the next few weeks and months, even days. And it's going to be a regular thing. So thank you all very much for tuning in and contributing. Oh, we got some people making some noise over on TikTok, so we'll quickly, very, very quickly address that. So Caught Up says, lower the house and rent prices in New Zealand. They would need to pull something to redeem from this. I mean, yeah, we do need to lower rent prices in particular. House prices, this certainly need to stabilise. Lowering them a bit is certainly important as well. Piri Moretu Kariri says, this guy got... Okay, we don't need to talk about that one. Typical ad hominem attacks that I get more than used to. Speaking of which, myself and Captain Jack from the Underground Daily were having a chat yesterday after the US presidential debate, and so you can find that little chat, or at least segment of the chat, with myself and him talking about these ad hominem attacks and how I tend to just shrug them off a bit like RDJ with his past. But yeah, pity's going to be pity. Fortunately, on this occasion, I don't have the chat up, and that's fundamentally the biggest issue with TikTok, is too many trolls. But what are you going to do? Danny wants the discussion tonight. Well, I've just finished the discussion. However, if you do want to go see a replay of everything, and it was the Treaty Principles Bill, that was the discussion, then you can head over to YouTube right now, Eric McRae, or just go to ericmcrae.com and you'll be able to find all of my links. And it should be right at the top of the list, is there for you, either as live or in the live slot after the fact. And yeah, it'll be very apparent. It just happened in the last few hours. So if you want to go check it out, you can. That goes for everyone else as well. If you want to see the start of the fact, head over to YouTube or head over to X. You'll be able to find it there. Certainly much easier over on YouTube, given it's just a catalogue of videos, not my rubbish tweets. But with all of that being said and done, that'll about do me. So thank you all for tuning in once again.